All right, class, let's go ahead and discuss what we're going to do with this workbook. Basically, we're going to cover everything that we've discussed in the past lectures that that entails everything that you can help you organize a data set moving forward. And basically, everything that we have covered is going to is basically all that you need to really help organize a data set. But let's start with everything that we started from the beginning. So let's start by first clicking on this first tab. And all we're really going to do here is it's just unhide data cells. And that's a pretty easy task. And one way you can determine whether or not those cells or those columns are hidden is if you look here at the top, you'll see kind of like a double bar. And all you have to do is highlight the column, drag over, and if you right click and you hit unhide, it basically unhides all the data that was hidden. Now, one reason you might be asking why is that why would people hide data? Well, in ways it just kind of helps organize data or quickly moves things around, um, so that you may be able to add different tables and whatnot. So that's our first task. It's pretty easy. Next, let's go on to freeze, and this is another easy task. And one thing I want to just to help you guys remember is whenever you're navigating in Excel, you can hit Control down or up, and it'll take you to the top or bottom of that data set, as long as there's no breaks in there. Again, if you want to highlight everything, you can hit Control Shift down and over, and it'll highlight everything in those cells. Again, if there's no data breaks or there's breaks, or you can hit Shift 8. Oh, sorry. Control Shift 8. Never mind, that's not working. But you get the idea. Control Shift down and over will help to highlight everything. So what it says here in the directions, just freeze the first column, the first row, and that's a pretty simple task. Now all you have to do is click in that basically where you want to freeze the data. So if I scroll down, I want this top row to stay in place, and I also want this left column to stay in place if I were to navigate over. Now what you would do is you click in the cell that intersects where the first row and the first column goes, and if you go to view up here in the top tab, all you have to do is hit freeze panes, and now you can scroll down and it keeps the headers for you. And if you wanted to scroll right, it also keeps the title. It's a very useful tool, especially if you're working with very large data sets. And to simply unfreeze that, it gives you the option, same tab, view, freeze panes, unfreeze, and there you have it. Pretty simple. I want to cover one more thing. If you wanted to, you could simply just hit freeze top row, and it would do that. Notice it took that top row there, so you'd have to pretty much same thing applies. You click below that. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. If you do freeze top row, freeze first column, it'll take one or it'll take column A. So if you wanted to, again, freeze that top row, if it started later on or further down in your workbook, you just click on the cell below and then hit freeze panes, and then it should work fine. All right, let's move on to link. Now, linking is something I wanted to throw in there because eventually one day, if you get really into data analysis, and those of you who go into grad school, I'm assuming you will, you'll notice that you'll have many tabs that are open, and sometimes you might have to click over and over again to get the tab you want. However, if you create a link to the tab with a workbook that you're working back and forth from, it makes things a lot simpler. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this button and we're going to link it to where it'll go to G2. So, and that's a simple task. Basically, all I did was create a shape, and I'll redo that by insert, shape, call it button. And let's just tidy it up a little bit. And now we're going to assign this button to G2. Simply all you have to do is right click on the shape, then go down to link, and you should get a dialog box that shows this. Now what you want to do is link to a place in this document, and where we want to link it to, we want to link it to freeze. Go to freeze, and the cell we want to is G2, and hit OK. And as soon as I click off the button and I hover over it, it'll give me the finger pointer. I click over, and now we're in G2 and in the freeze. Let's just go ahead and do that same thing with this button, and then we'll go right back to the link. So we'll go link, place in this document, and what cell do we want to go to? Let's just go A1. Okay, I click off the button, and now I hover back on, and now it gives me to A1. Just a simple, quick, easy way to navigate between Excel workbooks. Now let's talk about cell typing. Now this is also another useful thing. One way is because if I wanted to say put a whole bunch of string of text in one cell, kind of like how I have here in this example, the way you would typically do that is anytime you wanted to create a new row, you would hit enter. But if I press enter, what happens is it goes to the next cell down, just like that. So you can't necessarily use that same format, but Excel understands that some people want to put different text in following rows. Now, another way you can do it and notice that my text is kind of overseeing that. One way to do that is just click on that cell and hit wrap text, and it'll go over. But let me give you an example. Sometimes people will they'll hit space and then they'll type something, right? But sometimes when you reformat your cell, say if you want it bigger or larger, then everything kind of gets messed up. So here's the accurate way to do it. Now let's just redo this. Let's say ways to be successful with Excel. If you guys can remember from the last lecture or from the first lecture, all you have to do is hit Alt Enter, and what it does is it gives me the new row, and then we can hit practice, Alt Enter, review, Alt Enter, and practice again. So you guys get the idea, and that's a very useful tool, especially if you want to lay out different information for people and not in a table format. One thing I want to add to is if you ever want to redo something, I just X'd this out and I wanted to put it back. If you hit the buttons Control Z or Command Z if you're on a Mac, it'll redo or undo the thing that you just did. So that's 4 things down. Let's go into cell formatting, and this is also a really simple one. And I've kind of already discussed it a little bit, But one way to format cells is we have a couple of them right here. Just simple alignment. One thing that we want to do, see if you notice here in release date, it gives us the number. And if you guys can remember, what Excel does is it takes 1900, right? That's in short date, but if I put it in general, it'll put it as 1. And what it does is that it counts that as January 1st of 1900 as 1, and every date after that is a respective number, or yeah. So that's what you're seeing here when you see dates that are in number format, and that's a real easy fix. All you have to do is select that column and go to short date, and there you have it. Now I'm going to hit Control Z and show you guys a different way. We could highlight that, right click that cells that we just highlighted, and you can go to Format Cells, and what it does is it brings up a dialog box that we can change basically anything we want to it. And these get a little bit more specific. So if I wanted to get the date and the day, I can do this. Control Z, go back to that. Again, if I wanted to change it a little less specific, or maybe just the day and the month, I can do that. So you guys can see that you can, there's a number of different formatting things that you can do. But let me just go ahead and change this back to a short date. One thing is, if you're ever unsure, for instance right here, sometimes you can just go to Format Cells and you can format it in a lot of different ways that they consider. For instance, we have alignment. If I wanted to shrink to fit, it would shrink it. If I wanted to wrap the text, I can also do that. So you guys see that that can be very, very useful in organizing your data set. So now let's just go into some basic math functions. I know we covered this just briefly in the last, and I kind of created a link for some of you guys whose views is a little different. All that link did was just take the cell and move it there. But what we want to do is we want to sum all the Facebook likes for the lead actor based off a specific movie. And if you guys remember, anytime I'm in a cell and I hit enters, I'm telling Excel that, hey, I'm going to perform a function. Now, one way I could do this, if you're doing simple tasks, I can just simply click on that, hit the add button, hit the add button. Let's just say you're doing maybe 1 or 2 different, or maybe even 3 cells, and I can hit enter. And basically what that did, if I click on this cell and I click in the formula bar, it'll tell me which cells are in my formula. But yet again, if we want to do some long strings of cells, we can easily do that by selecting certain functions. Now, if I start to type in here, see how I put D, and it starts to bring up all the functions that start with the letter D. Now we want to add, but there is no add function. We need to sum. So we start by saying SUM, and then we have sum. We tab over, and what do we want? We want all these data points. Oops. For this case, I'm just going to drag down, and then I hit enter, and basically it just summed all of that row. Now again, if you wanted to do that same thing to another column right next to it, all I would have to do is click on that column, and if you guys remember this, if I put my cursor on that little box down at the bottom right, I would drag that over, and bam, now I have the same function just copied over there. Now I'm going to go back real quick by Control Z, Control Z, And what if I lock these though? And if you guys can remember, to lock something, all you have to do is hit F4. Or for some of your guys' keyboards, you'll notice that your F4 function is dedicated to 2 tasks. So some of you guys might have to hit function F4. But if you toggle through that F4, if you notice when it's just CA by itself, that means it's not locking anything. If I hit F4, the first toggle tells me I'm going to lock the cells, or I'm sorry, the column and the row. If I hit it again, now it's just going to lock the rows. If I hit it again, now it's just going to lock the column. For this case, I'm going to lock the column and the rows for both of those. Hit enter, and now watch what happens when I drag it over. It's basically giving me that same formula from right there because I locked everything in. So that's something that you need to be aware of whenever you're using multiple functions, you're sliding them over. Make sure that you either have them locked or unlocked, because it can get problematic. But anytime you're unsure, just click on the cell, click in the formula bar, and it'll tell you what it's pulling from. But we don't want that. We don't want it locked in this case. We want to sum this. And again, just to show you guys some simple arithmetic stuff that you can use in Excel. Again, if I just wanted to do a quick calculation there, and I wanted to subtract D33 from C33. So it's D and that's C. So I can click in that cell, hit the minus sign, click in the cell, enter, and bam. Now I have 13,888, and I can do the same thing. Click on that. Let's say I want to divide it by 6. Boom. And now I have some simple arithmetic that you can do in Excel, and you can get creative however you want. And you can also use this to nest certain functions, which we'll go over a little bit later. Now let's go on to text to columns. If you guys can remember, I told you before that in some scenarios you extract data from either an online database or whatever. And if you put that stuff into Excel, it'll take all of that data and put it into one cell. Now that could be really problematic, especially if you want to have each one of these in its own separate column. Now actually, Excel has a really easy way to do this. All you have to do is highlight all of the titles in that first cell. You would then click on the data tab, or go over to where it says data tools, and then you hit text to columns. Basically all you need to know is delimited. You hit next. And how are these separated? They are separated by a space. And you can kind of see a preview of what it's going to give us. All we have to do is hit finish. And now we have all our data nice and easily organized into a table. It's also a pretty simple function, but if you don't know how to do it, it would take you hours to organize that. So now let's create lists. And lists, as you guys can remember, are very important for creating drop-down box. And they also help us to navigate certain things a lot more faster than you would if you didn't have a list. So if you guys can remember, we want to create a list of movie titles. And that's real simple. What we're going to do is Control-Shift down. We're going to highlight all those movie titles. Then we go into the name box, and we want to name this list. Now, anytime that I do a list, a way to keep it organized, because eventually if you have a lot of lists, it gets a little hard. We're going to name it list without any spaces. I'm going to call it titles. And all you have to do is hit enter. And now, when let's say if I click off that, off those highlighted cells, I click this drop down box, I have a thing here called list titles, and it'll highlight that for me. So as you can see, that was just an easy way to create a list. And there again, we have our name list in the name box. Pretty simple. We're going to come back to that, and we're gonna find some use for that in a little bit. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually make a table. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to create a table with the data below, and then we're going to create with a list of titles, and we're going to create a data validation box right here. Now you might be thinking like, what do you mean a table? Well, Excel doesn't recognize this as a table per se, it just recognizes it as a string of data that's collected together. Now it does know some certain things, but it doesn't recognize it as a table per se. Now one thing you could do is you could just click anywhere inside this string of data, and if you go to insert and then you click on table, and yes, my table does have headers. Excel basically knows where that string of data begins and ends, and if you hit OK, it now just creates a table. Now tables are very useful later on when you are starting to do some high-level functions, and rather than flipping back and forth from different tabs, you can just select a specific table, and Excel will know where to go. So we just created a table, and now we want to do a list with the titles, and what we'll do is we'll just select this, and yeah, I know we just created a list, but let's do it again. We'll call this titles2, enter, and now we want to create a data validation Dropbox, and this is going to again come in helpful later on. So we click on that cell, we hit data, go to data validation, what kind of criteria we want to list, and the source. Now if we hit equals list titles to enter, and now just put the list from right here into that data validation box. Now sometimes when you create a whole bunch of lists though, it gets a little bit challenging, so let's go ahead and redo all that. And hit Control Z and go to data validation, list, where I want that list to come from. Now if you hit F3 or function F3 depending on your keyboard, Excel will pull up another another dialog box with all the lists that you have. And the reason why I'm showing you guys this is because, again, once you have a whole bunch of lists, if you mistype it, Excel's not going to recognize it, and it gets very frustrating. So F3 gets you your source of all your lists. Hit OK, and there we have it. So now let's go into some of our lookup functions. And if you guys, some of these will look somewhat familiar to us. All right, again, we're gonna do some VLOOKUPs here. So let's just start with this first example. VLOOKUP, if you guys can remember, it's gonna do a vertical lookup, and so basically we're gonna put a VLOOKUP here in these cells for this table, and we want to find release date, genre, and gross revenue based off the name that we're looking for. Now again, when we start working with large data sets, this gets really simple. I mean, this gets really challenging to look at the specific movie title and then find that specific data point you're looking for. So this is where VLOOKUP comes into a lot of help. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a list of just these titles right here. So we're going to highlight those, go into our name box, list, and we'll call this titles3, enter, click in that cell, data tab, data validation, list, F3, titles3, okay, and now we have our list. And now we want to know when each one of these titles were released. So we can hit equals. Remember, it's telling Excel to do a function. We want to look up. So just type BL. And you can tab over or double click on that. And what value do we want to look up? Well, we want to look up this value right here. And where do we want to look that data up? Well, we want to look it up in this table here. And what column index would release date be under? Well, it's 1, 2, so it's 2. And do we want an approximate match or a false or a true match? We want an exact match. Close parentheses. When we close parentheses, it tells Excel that we're done or we're completed with the formula. We hit enter. And notice it just gave us a number. And the reason why that is because the formatting is off. So we get a short date. There we go. Now what we could do is we can actually drag this over and it'll now give us our formulas across the board. So let's just check this for Over the Hill. It was 1915, 1920, or 915, 1920. It's a crime. The gross revenue right now is being reported as a date, and we don't want that. We want a number. So there we go. Not all the time is that going to work the way you want it. So sometimes you will have to copy these over manually and then change each one of those things. As you guys can see right here, it actually kind of did that right. Right now our data is not actually reporting correctly. Notice as I click on the cell, everything should be right here. So this would be 3. Also, you notice that it's also looking for release date in this, and we want to look at Over the Hill. So we can simply drag that over, and same thing is going on here. And that's also wrong. That should be 4. So you guys are seeing how sometimes when you slide the cursor over, it can be problematic. Again, one way to fix that, which I'll just show you guys right now, is let's say I wanted to just drag all that over. I can click there and I can lock in these cells again by hitting F4. Enter. And now when I slide it over, it's going to keep those cells. But again, it shouldn't still be correct because it's still telling Excel to pull from this column. So we have to go here, 3, and then 4. Change our format, and there we go. Let's do another example using this little table right here. We want to find the tool, and then we want to find the cost and the color of that tool based off this list here. So again, we're going to create another list. Select those lists, or those cells. We'll call this list tools. Enter. We'll create a data validation. F3. List tools. Okay. Okay. Now we have a list there, and now we want to find the cost based off this. So again, we're going to use the VLOOKUP function. Again, VLOOKUP is looking up vertically. We equals VLOOKUP. What value we want to look up? Right there. What table array? Well, this is our table that we want to look it up at. And what column do we want to look up at? It'd be column number 2. And do we want an exact match? Yes, we do. Close parentheses. And as you can see, screwdriver costs $2.50, wrench $2.75, but we also want to do the color. So we can do the same thing, control copy. And that's going to mess up because we didn't lock any of those things in. But if we want to, I can click in here and I can simply just drag it over and drag that over. Oops. Hit enter. But now it's still pulling that second column, but we want the third column. So there you have it, another easy way to use VLOOKUP with a drop-down box. Now let's go one example with HLOOKUP. I personally don't find HLOOKUP as useful, but in some cases, in some scenarios, you will, right? Especially if you want to look up dates of a specific row, as we're going to do in this case. So I've already kind of done that, but what I need to do is just delete that. So we want to create a list based off these dates. That way we have a drop-down box here, so we can find the sales for each one of these individuals on that specific date. Again, there's easier ways to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to be looking into index matching a little bit, which kind of streamlines all this right here. So we're going to go again, we're going to create a list. We're going to highlight that list, and we're going to call that in our name box list dates, enter, click on that cell, data validation, list, F3, dates, okay, now we have our list there, and we want to return the sales, so we will hit equals, type in H, lookup, double click, or you can hit tab and it'll select it. What value do we want to look up? Well, we actually want to look up the date here. So we're going to click that. And where do we want to look it up at? Well, we're going to look it up in this table. And now what row index do we want to look up? So Abigail Outerink, she's in row number 2. And we want an exact match. Close parentheses, enter. And let's just do this one more example with Daniel. So equals HLOOKUP. We want the date. This will be our table. What row index? Well, that would be, Daniel would be, let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it'd be row 10. And exact match. Enter. And there you have it. Now, if you notice, that was kind of a pain that I just did, where I actually counted down. We're going to use the match function a little bit to see how that actually works much faster later on. But here, as you can see, we can find specific dates and then the sales that each one of these had on that particular day. Now this is the most important one right here that we're going to look up, and this is the thing that you really want to master. If you can master these, then it really gets, things start to get really easy in Excel, especially for extracting data out of places. So let's go to index match. Alright guys, let's take a look at index match, and if you guys are ever unsure, what I did is I just went through it and I put the formula there so you guys can kind of understand it. But what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about index. Well, index is a conversion, or basically a way to think of it is a combination of both vertical lookup and horizontal lookup at the same time. Now the function is pretty much similar across the board, but it does have a little bit different nuances. But all you have to do is follow what it tells you and you can basically get it down. So basically what we want to do is we want to return a data point right here based off the name and a variable across the top. Now what we're going to do here is, see, I've already kind of created a table here, and this table is called table player data. And again, the one way to do data or enter tables is insert, and then you click on table, and it'll create a table for us, and then it'll ask you what you can name that table on table design, and in this case I just named it table player data. But the first thing I'm going to show you is how to do index match without using a table. There's two ways, and tables make it somewhat simple later on. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a list of names. And I've already kind of done that already, but the way you would do that, again, you just highlight the list, and then you would type in list names in the name drop down box. And I'll just do that again. I'll call this list names 1. Enter. We're also going to create a list of variables, and the variables that we want to look up are in the headers right here. So again, we can highlight that, go in here, list variables, and we'll call it 2. Enter. And if you guys can remember our data validation, it's list F3, and we want names 2 or names 1. Okay. And then our variable is already in there. I already put that list in there. But for the sake of it, I'll just go ahead and do it again. Data validation, list, the source, hit F3, and we want variable. So let's just put this on a data point. Let's go training load. Okay, so we want Excel to return this person's name along with this variable. So essentially for David Cassidy, it should give us 168.6 for his training load. Now the way we're going to do that is hit equals index, and where do we want to look that up? Well, the thing is, I'm going to highlight this whole entire string of data, and what it's going to do, it's going to tell me that I just highlighted table player data all. Or if I didn't have that table there, it would just have those string of text. Now this is where the match function is going to come into play. It's asking us what row do we want to start looking at data. Well, it's going to be in this first row right here. And to do that, we need to match this right here, and this is where nesting comes in, a formula within a formula. So we're going to hit match, and we want to look up David Cassidy. And where do we want to look that up? We want to look that up in this first column right there. And notice is that Excel automatically put that in there for me. And what kind of match type do we want? Well, we want an exact match. Close parentheses, and that just closed that formula for match. And now we want column index. So which column do we want to look up? So we want to match training load, so we hit match, and we want to look up that value. Where do we want to look up this value at? Well, we want to look it up in the headers in our table. We want an exact match. And notice that even though we put the parentheses, our formula is not done yet. We have to hit one more parentheses, and we hit enter. Hopefully this works. And there we have it. So based off David Cassidy for training sport duration, or training sport load, 168.60. And again, if we wanted to flip that around to different variables, we can easily find that out. And this, again, this is going to come in very handy, especially when we start making dynamic graphs. Let me just show you guys one more way to do that. That's a little bit more streamlined, but it gets a little advanced. So we can hit equals, and we're going to hit index. If I start writing TBL, it brings up my table. If I hit tab, if I double click on that, it'll automatically put that in its place. And now I can kind of write this much faster, which I'll just do really quickly, match. And where do I want to look up this value? Well, I want to look it up in TBL. Now, if you hit the bracket sign after table player data, like I just did, it's going to bring up all the headers for that table. Well, because I know where it is, I want to look up name. Close the bracket, comma, exact match, close parentheses, move on to column index. We want to match training load, look up value in the table. And where do we want to look it up? We want to look it up in the headers. Exact match. One more parentheses, enter, and there we have it. Again, that way is a little bit more advanced, but it will help you once you start doing different tables on different tabs. Let's go to our last example, and that's what we're going to do here is we're going to actually index two different things based off a date. For instance, what I mean by that is, what if I wanted to index both name and date and variable? So now we're using three things. But what it's going to do, it's going to ask us to do name and date both vertically. And there's a way we can do that, which it gets a little bit tricky, but it still works very well. And this, again, this is a very easy or a very complicated function, but it's very useful. Okay, last example where we're going to actually do, we're going to match two different things. In this case, we're going to match both name and date from a vertical standpoint, and then we're going to match the variable right there. And the index function is robust enough to do that for us. So let's go ahead and figure out how we do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to index equals index. And what's the array that we want to look up? Well, it's going to be this whole array of data right here. So just select that whole data. And what rows do we want to look up? Well, because we have name and date that we're going to both look up, we have to select both of these. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit name, or that cell there, J6. We're also going to hit and, or shift 7 to get the ampersand sign, and date. So we're getting name and date. And I missed something up there, so let's back up. Remember, we have to nest this. So what we're going to do is we're going to match. So we're going to match, and what do we want to match? We want to match name and date. So name and date. Now, where do we want to look up the name and date at in the vertical columns? We want to look at both in this. So to do that, the first one we need to do is the name column. Select that, comma. Oh, I'm sorry. Ampersand sign. So now we have both those string of cells. One thing that Excel won't allow you to do, it won't allow you to highlight both rows and drag down. You have to select them individually. And we want an exact match. So now it's going to ask us what column we want to go. So going on to the next column, we also want to match the variable. which is that one right there. Now what we could have done is we could just simply gone into our table and said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Put 6. But again, if this were to be a long string of variables, that would be kind of problematic. So what we could do is again do match. We want to match session RPE for sport. And where do we want to look that up? I'm going to highlight the headers. And we want an exact match. Close parentheses and close parentheses. Hopefully this works. It won't because we don't have a name there yet. Hit enter and we get NA. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a data validation there. And list F3. And we already had these listed names from the previous tab. So let's go list names 1. Okay. And let's just pick somebody here. So now that we have, say, David Cassidy on December 9th, 2017, which would be right here, his RPE was 7. Now there's no list here, but we can essentially just type in here. And again, he had a 7 on the 10th as well. So as you can see, this is a very useful tool, especially if you have a lot of data that you're considering. Let's go ahead and fill out the rest of these, but let's do it a little bit differently. I'm going to actually make this into a table, and that way it gets a little bit simpler to insert the formula, but it gets a little bit but it does get a little bit more complicated as far as just learning out the features, especially for beginning. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter a table. So say table, and yes, we have headers. And what do we want to call this table? We're going to call this TBL sport data. Enter. So we have our list already in place. So we're going to index table sport data. And what do we want to look up? We want to look up the name and the date. So we want to hit match name and date. Now where do we want to look it up at? Well, we're going to look it up in table sport data, and we're going to look it up in the name and the date. So now we have name and date within the table, and we want an exact match, close parentheses. Now what column do you want to look it up at? So moving on a column, and we want to match this time duration sport, and we want table sport data. We want the headers, and again we want an exact match, close parentheses, and let's hope this works. And there we go. So on December 8th, Mike Featherston he was in the game for 56 minutes. Will was in for 49. Pretty cool. Let's do one last example. Again, just in case you missed it. So now we're going to look up both name and date for the training load for sport. And let's just change this date to something else. Let's go to the 10th. And we're going to do it the same way that we just did, just so you guys can get an understanding of how it works. Again, it is a little bit more complicated on the surface, but it does get easier the more you do it. So we want to index, and what do we want to index? We want to index table sport data. And what rows do we want to look up? Well, we want to match these two. So we're going to hit match. We want to match name and date. And where do we want to look it up? Well, we want to look it up in table sport data. And which columns do we want to look it up? To bring that up, we're going to hit the bracket sign. Again, it's going to be the name, close bracket, and table sport data, date. So as you can see, it's highlighting where it's going to look it up at. We want an exact match. Now let's move over to column to do that, comma. As you see, it switched over. And we want to match training load sport. So let's match. And where do we want to look that up at? Table sport data, brackets to bring up the headers, close bracket, exact match, one more parenthesis to close it, hit enter, and there we have it. So now we have all our variables in a dynamic way to where we can get both the name and date, and then also return the data that we want. Use this video as a reference because we will be doing this in class, as well as you will need it for homework, but this stuff will also be on the exam, so make sure that you go through this thoroughly and understand how to do this efficiently.